So if you've been watching my streams lately, you knew that a Blair video was coming, but I have to admit I am conflicted on this guy, as in theory, he should be amazing. He can reach 100% skill crit rate like Haley and now Viessa, and obviously you guys like those characters now. However, the more I played and invested into Blair, the more he started to piss me off, and it took me a while to nail down exactly why I don't like him, with the exception of his gun build of course, and why Blair is now a perfect example of the fact that crit cannot always fix everything, as even if you gave him 100% base crit rate by default, he'd still suck shit. We'll start off by going over each of Blair's abilities and how they work on a fundamental level, and afterwards we'll go over the mods. Blair's first ability is called Blaze Up, and it goes hand in hand with his passive. Blaze Up lets you place a flame zone directly beneath you, which lingers, dealing damage on a set interval, as well as applying burn to the targets that pass over. And the ability itself is fairly straightforward, but how it deals damage, maybe not so much. Say we have 3 flame zones on the same spot. Each flame zone will try to apply burn on the target, but only one burn effect can actually take place. So even though there are 3 zones, there will only ever be one instance of burn damage. However, the zone itself does damage separate from the burn, and similar to Freyna's toxin puddles, they can work together to deal their own instances of damage on their own intervals, which is good. Funnily enough, spamming puddles on high cooldown is probably the highest DPS route for Blair to take, but it is also the least practical for several reasons. Flame zones can only be deployed directly beneath you. They cannot be thrown unless you take the Incendiary Bomb as a Transcendent mod, which, while cool, sucks. Incendiary's throw range is shorter than you are, and the throw is underhanded instead of a direct projectile. The throw locks down your character for an amount of time that I am not comfortable with, and then the projectile itself is just too fucking slow. On top of that, flame zones have a tiny ass range compared to the room sprawling effects we're used to on other characters. And if you do take Incendiary to let you throw it, it cuts off some of that range which Blair desperately needs in order to even try and be competitive. Moving on though, earlier I said the ability ties into his passive because the passive, Pitmaster, does 2 things. The first is if a target is burning when you deal skill damage to them, then it actually increases the base skill crit damage of that attack. This is super unusual as not even Haley gets an increase in base crit damage, and as of this video, between him and everyone else I've covered, Blair is the only one that actually can. The second thing that Pitmaster does though is boost the base skill crit rate based on the number of flame zones that you have active on the ground. Now boosting base crit rate is nothing new, you guys are used to that with Haley boosting you to the moon and back. Blair can do the same thing here, just a little bit less. And there's nothing inherently wrong with this passive, it's super strong and we take that. So if there's a problem to be had with this passive, it's simply that it is entirely wasted on Blair. Blair's second ability, Extinguish, which contrary to its name, does not actually put out the fires, though it used to. And instead, it simply pulls a buff from each flame zone that you have down, giving you MP back and granting you a power modifier bonus. This ability is pretty fucking nice as it allows you to completely subvert any and all MP issues you might have had while spamming flame zones, with the cooldown as short as 5 seconds between all of your MP refunds. Blair's third skill is Burn Taste, and I can only hope to God that's a typo and they meant burnt taste, because otherwise, what the fuck? And right off the bat, guys, this ability is bait. If you truly have nothing else to use, then sure, use it, but this thing locks you into a flamethrower animation with the range of an armless man. If you want to be a sitting duck, barely able to move, then this skill is for you. But most often, you're better off just spamming more flame zones and retaining your mobility. But then again, as we already just discussed, flame zone has its own problems. The last skill is Deadly Cuisine, which, again, locks Blair into an animation that lasts until the heat death of the universe, before finally launching out a fireball that moves slower than my morning breakfast in my intestinal tract, where on the impact, the fireball deals damage and splits into a fixed amount of smaller fireballs that deal smaller damage wherever they end up landing, which is not always even remotely close to the target you threw it at. For how little damage this thing does, its cooldown is disgusting at 120 fucking seconds. You don't actually use the skill for damage, most of the time you use it to put down more flame zones, as the single saving grace here is the impacts of all the baby fireballs lay down more flame zones. So this is an easy way to lay down several of them at a time when you need them on demand instead of one by one. The ability has a transcendent mod called Truly Deadly Cuisine, and that removes all of the secondary impacts from the main fireball, but makes the fireball do a lot more damage. And while the damage is still pretty fucking sad, dealing less than half of what a Kyle impact could do, it does at least bring the cooldown from 120 seconds down to 70. This is far better suited and more pleasantly used on max cooldown to deal with dungeon bosses, and while you can use it against Colossi, be aware you're not even gonna kill Devourer with it, and that is impressively fucking awful. When it comes to the remaining Transcendent mods, you are now left with two other choices, the first of which is Classic Chef. All it does is make it so you can now benefit from 7 total flame zones instead of 5 on your passives, so a 35% crit rate bonus instead of 25, and then the Fireball has 5 secondary projectiles, secondary flame zones, instead of 3. For general use, this would probably be the best to use if Flame Zone weren't such a genuinely fucking painful skill to use, so I cannot recommend using it over Truly Deadly Cuisine. The Meatball is just going to be better for general use. The last option, though, is Backdraft, and this is by far his strongest mod, and the single reason I ended up making this video, despite how much I have come to hate Blair. Backdraft completely shifts all of his bonuses from skill effects to firearm-based effects instead. So if you hit a burning target, you no longer get base skill crit damage, you get base firearm crit damage. You don't get base skill crit rate, you get firearm crit rate, and when it comes to Extinguish, you still get the same MP refund per flame zone that you have active. Now instead of getting a measly little power modifier bonus, you get both a firearm attack percent bonus as well as a base weak point damage increase. Again, I need to stress the importance of the weak point bonus being a base increase, as now next to Luna, Blair is the only other character I've covered that can actually buff base weak point damage before mods and other bonuses. This mod gives Blair the absolute strongest firearm buff possible between all the other characters. He takes a massive shit on Supply Moisture Valby, and while technically Haley's extra crit from Cold Fury can still beat out Blair in the right scenarios, Blair remains competitive if not better than Haley in most cases. And I don't understand how he's so slept on when it comes to this. Not only is his buff competitive with Haley for gun builds, but he doesn't get reduced to the speed of a dying turtle while his buff is up, and in a prolonged encounter he pulls ahead further still with his ability to infinitely sustain his own MP with no reliance on weak point hits or other random conditions. On that note, for the gun build we take increased HP, stim accelerant, and overwhelming HP for general survivability. Antifreeze is not a fixed mod here, you can swap it out for immunity against any particular element, I just hate getting frozen. And then sensory deprivation is there for damage reduction, as we really have no other things to bring besides that. Shot focus is self-explanatory, shouldn't be a huge surprise that a gun build uses a gun boosting mod. Extension and duration are there to maximize on the time we get from the Extinguish buff before we need to lay down flame zones again, the longer the better. Double cooldown mods, as we obviously want to be able to lay down the flame zones as quickly as we can while the boss is still spawning in. For the weapon, and I need to clarify that this is not how you would ever build your Enduring Legacy. This is specifically built for Blair and Blair alone, and only on bosses that have less than 30% firearm critical hit resistance. Otherwise, the math changes by a lot. But for Gun Blair, and assuming a 40% weak point hit rate, which I think is more than fair given how bad you guys are at aiming, this is what you'd be rolling on anything but Infernal Walker. I won't read out these mods, as I believe you are all perfectly capable of hitting the pause button. The only thing I'll quickly address here is that yes, I am using Edging Shot over Rifling Reinforcement, and that's because Blair already gives the gun firearm attack percentage to the point we lose damage if we take it again, and Edging is the best damage increase in that mod slot because of it. Aside from that, just make sure to match the element of the enhancement mod with the weakness of the target. The Quenching buff from Enduring is cool, but I promise you it doesn't actually matter more than matching the correct element, and the calculator here is factoring in all the bonuses, including Quenching, and it's still telling me to run Electric Enhancement on Devourer. You do not need fire in order for Enduring to be a good gun. Lastly, if you are absolutely certain you want to suffer on the skill build, let's talk about the Spicy Meatball. At a minimum, we have increased HP in case we take some hits, then focus on fire and dimension to boost our ratios and modifiers, but mainly our cooldowns, along with Nimble Fingers and MP conversion. Remember that Truly Deadly Cuisine brings the cooldown down from 120 seconds to 70 seconds, but it's still incredibly important to bring it as low as it can go, because if you're gonna commit to the meatball, you need to be able to spam it as often as you can. We obviously take the standard 4 crit mods as you would expect. Blair is a crit quadruped like any other, just now he's on fire, and that's literally it. If you're gonna go for it on a boss fight, you can replace increased HP with Dangerous Ambush, but guys, I think that is a horrible, horrible idea. Most of the time, Meatball is going to be used when the boss is upright or on a dungeon boss, and in either case, Ambush is completely useless to you. If you want to lean away from the Meatball, you can use Classic Chef or Incendiary in place of it, but I promise you in either case, you're still going to have a miserable fucking time, and in fact, I recommend just using the gun build for both bosses and dungeons, and you'll have a much better time of things instead of trying to jump through several hoops just to have subpar damage. For components, it's actually going to be the Slayer set in either case. Who would have thought, right? The Slayer's mag size bonus is still best in slot on the gun build, and its base power ratio bonus is still best in slot on the skill build. For substats, it's the standard fare on screen, which you have all seen 1,000 times by now. On your reactor, however, the weapon build doesn't actually care. You don't need to rank your reactor or get anything special on it, but if you had to choose something to get in on there, you would want skill cooldown and skill duration. On the skill build reactor, though, you do want damage to Colossus and then either skill crit damage, dimension power ratio, or skill cooldown in that order of priority. Guys, I am obviously not very happy about the current state of affairs for our crackhead chef here, and he needs a lot of love. His kit is genuinely unpleasant to play around. Everything he does locks him out and slows him down. If there were one word to describe everything about him, it is slow, if not inconvenient. I doubt we're gonna get changes to him anytime soon. If I had to guess, he's probably the next ultimate, and I'm not asking that we turn him into a fire-based Freyna copy, because that's, one, not even what I want, but two, not every character needs to be a Freyna, or else what is the point in character diversity? But holy shit, it would be nice if someone could actually look over this guy later and clean things up. And then finally, to all of the keyboard warrior Blair defenders ready to pop up in my comments, I am tired, but I am ready. Give me your best arguments for Blair, and in return, I will tell you why your parents are siblings.